All right, welcome to another edition of the Baseline Scoop. I'm your host, as always, Zach Ciavolella, here with my guys, Justin Crosby and Andy Quach. Guys, how you doing today?
Doing well. Hope you guys are doing well as well. It's been a minute.
It's definitely been a minute, but we're back, baby.
Flu season in full effect, but we are back with the Baseline Scoop. Happy to be back. Really just happy to talk some Sixers. There's a lot going on, a lot of great stuff going on for the Sixers. They just wrapped up a 5-game road game trip where they actually went 4-1, which is just super awesome. So we're going to get into some of that and talk a little bit about some of the players who made all that possible and take a quick little preview at the upcoming game against the Portland Trailblazers. But before we do get to that, just like to say, as always, the Baseline Scoop is brought to you by La Touraine Watches. Shop La Touraine for affordable luxury watches, and La Touraine watches and accessories offer timeless style and design without high prices or shoddy materials. Now, every watch they sell is also backed by their 24-month warranty to protect your investment for years to come. You can now pre-order the new Manifest. Those are now open, and do not forget to use code BLS10 for 10% off. That's code BLS10 for 10% off your new La Touraine watch. So, guys, Sixers, starting one of the most difficult remaining schedule of any team in the league. Start on that 5-game road trip. That is now kaput. That's now done. That's finished. That's in the past. They come out 4-1. The marquee game of all of that was obviously the game Saturday night against the Bucks. So that game was insanely impressive. Like that's just, to open it up that way. Like it was one of the most impressive games that we've seen as late from these Sixers. But the question is, was that the game of the year? So Justin, why don't you go ahead first? Do you think that was the game of the year for the Sixers, or is there another one that sticks in your mind as so far the game of the year for Philadelphia?
No, I think that definitely was the game of the year. With the magnitude of how important it was for the confidence of the team to get a W against a team like Milwaukee. Definitely think it was the game of the year. The way they came back, the way they performed in the fourth quarter, offensively and defensively. Definitely game of the year winner at this point.
Yeah, I mean, the other game that I think kind of ranks close in people's minds, I know the Memphis Grizzlies game from just a couple weeks ago is definitely one that is not only fresh in people's minds, but comes up among those game of the year feelings. But Andy, would you agree with Justin, or do you think perhaps the Memphis game, perhaps another game would qualify for game of the year?
I definitely give the nod to the Bucks. I mean, late season games are always going to count more than early season, especially when teams are this close in the standings. And more importantly, the fashion in which they won that game, coming back from a 15-point deficit. James Harden showing vintage signs as a scorer. That's something you love to see, especially as we're getting closer to the playoffs. James Harden's playmaking has always been kind of the floor for this team, but his ability to get back into that kind of takeover score mode, either when Embiid doesn't have it or when teams are selling out against Embiid, is going to be what determines the ceiling of this team come postseason.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to tell you guys, you're both right. I think this game against the Bucks, I would agree. Definitely the marquee matchup this year for it. And I think what it really comes down to is just consider the opponent. You guys talked about how it's a more late in season game. Obviously, that's a factor. But the fact that you're going up against the Bucks and Giannis specifically, I mean, I think that gives it an edge over the Memphis game, clearly. And I think on top of that, just you think about the loss to the Celtics in the game previous to it, and how deflating that was for Philadelphia. And then to come back out and against Milwaukee to put up that kind of a performance. I mean, to come back the way that they did, obviously Giannis and Embiid have. It's not a it's not the most classic. It's not Magic Bird But there is something of a rivalry between the two players. Two of the best teams in the Eastern Conference, consistently in the MVP conversation over the past few years. Giannis has had his antics in Philadelphia. We've seen that over the past couple of years as well. So to see that opportunity for the Sixers, absolutely huge. Great milestone for them. And it helped them kind of close the gap. Not even so much against Milwaukee. They're still 4 games back, and Milwaukee seems completely untouchable in the standings. But they're now just a game and a half back of the Boston Celtics. Of course, that came after 2 more wins that were soon to follow for Philadelphia. But the Bucks game really opened up that window for that situation. So I can't say how big enough the Bucks game was, and it kind of begs the question, because you look at the Eastern Conference, who are the teams to actually give Philadelphia concern? I feel it's pretty simply just Boston and Milwaukee. You guys can disagree if you want, and I'd love to hear your point on that. But while the Sixers would struggle with Boston, I think that's pretty fair and clear to say. Are they sneakily kind of built to be the team to beat the Bucks? Like Andy, what have you seen as far as the Sixers, their construction against Milwaukee's construction and their chances as compared to any other team let's focus on the Eastern Conference. Just in the East, who looks to be the most qualified to beat, and that's tough to beat the best team in the East, the Milwaukee Bucks.
Yeah. It's hard to say that any team is going to be built to beat the Bucks, just because they're a very deep team. They're led by Giannis. So, but that being said, the Sixers probably are at the top of the rankings in terms of who is best suited to play the Bucks. I would go as far to say that I think the Sixers would prefer to see Milwaukee in the playoffs as opposed to Boston with the way things line up. Just taking a look at it league-wide, like if you're naming the best possible people to guard Giannis, I mean, both Embiid and PJ Tucker are probably top 20 at least in options in that standpoint. And then Philly's biggest weakness defensively has to be the guards. And the Bucks, while they have Jrue Holiday, we kind of know that Jrue Holiday isn't like that. Philly especially, even though it was a bit earlier in his career, he's going to get his points, 18 to 22 points per game. But like, is that kind of the guy you want taking the last shot when the game's on the line? Probably not. So that way it does match up well. The concerning thing is that the work that Giannis can do as a roamer on defense, if PJ Tucker is getting a lot of run in that playoff series, which he probably will because they need him against Giannis, I can't think of a better candidate for Giannis to guard than PJ Tucker and have him just kind of wreak havoc as a free safety. And I'm sure we'll see that a lot if it comes time for it in a 7-game series.
Yeah, I think that, first of all, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head as far as Embiid and Tucker being, as far as defensive matchups for Giannis, some of the top ideal names. I think 20 is definitely fair. When you look at the top names to defend Giannis, that free safety, Antetokounmpo possibility like that, I'll be honest, like that does scare me a bit. The one kind of ripple, that I wonder if you can kind of like put in that way now is the play of Jalen McDaniels, which has been, I think, above expectation for what many were thinking. Obviously we thought he was going to contribute, but he really began to show what he can do in a versatile sense. Obviously he got into some foul trouble, but overall solid game from McDaniels. And so he can kind of be that change of pace. So when you do have Giannis playing that kind of free safety kind of role, a quick sub out of Tucker for McDaniels might be the answer there. It's just up to Doc to actually make that adjustment. And then you can say the same about George Niang as well. The way that he played against the Bucks, crazy that he's unplayable against so many teams, and yet the kryptonite for the Bucks. Gotta love George Niang. Like he always keeps you guessing, But it really was an all around impressive win. Even with the injuries that they went and suffered, Tobias Harris and PJ Tucker both going down at different points. Who impressed you the most, Justin, that night? of all the players on the Sixers.
I mean, James Harden was tremendous in the fourth quarter. Just aggressive scoring the ball, like getting calls too, right? Like that's one of the themes of this year. He's still been getting to the line, I want to say 8-9 times a game, but like he really was getting vintage James Harden calls, and just the confidence to shoot the shots that he was shooting with like arc and good range. Like that was very, very encouraging to see, specifically against a team like the Bucks, which number one defensive team in the NBA right now, defensive rating. So definitely good to see Harden play well. And then also Maxey, like I think Maxey is a matchup problem. I mean, you can say, defensively he might be a matchup problem, but he is definitely a matchup problem for the Bucks. There's nobody on that roster in the open court. You can say Giannis, but he still doesn't have the foot speed to keep up with Maxey. And Maxey turning those corners with maybe Grayson Allen, or even if Drew Holiday's trying to guard him, he's going to get around those corners every time. And I just think if it's a playoff matchup, I think Maxey will be a significant X factor in a 7-game playoff series with his ability and his pace and his speed. And you saw that once he got to the line once he got to the rim a couple times, then after that, they started showing very high on the screens on Maxey when like Crowder and stuff was trying to guard him, so he couldn't turn that corner. So I definitely think he'll be an X factor. But those two guys really stood out for me. And of course, we talk about Joe all the time. Not that we're leaving him out, but more so those two guys stood out for me.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point. Tyrese Maxey was kind of the hero of the third quarter. James Harden, obviously, the hero of the fourth. It's crazy to think that Harden was a bucket and a rebound away from a 40-point triple-double. Obviously that's giving him a lot if you're going to just tack on this. But at the same time, like that's an impressive game. And I think he had 17 points in the fourth quarter, I think it was. And like you said, it really was just vintage
Harden. I think 19.
It might have been 19. Yeah, 19. Yeah. So like against a physical, you talk about how tenacious the Bucks defense is. They're physical too. You think especially Drew Holiday, we talked about him, how he's not necessarily the type of guard that gives the Sixers problems. He's not a Kyrie, a Dame Lillard, a Gabe Vincent for some odd reason. He's not that type of guard. But he's more of a kind of a pesky all around strong defensive guard. Usually throws up, guys that throw off the Sixers. So he's kind of the kryptonite to those, Kyries, the Dames, Jamal Murray's, those types. But, even still, it's a really impressive job by James Harden to kind of overcome that defense from Holiday, the team defense from the entire unit, and really just be able to perform like he did. And, you just want to see that in the postseason. That's the big thing. And that's what's tough about this time of year, is that all conversations effectively come back to that. Okay, we'll do it in the playoffs. And it's like, okay, well, we'll see if they can when they do, but you can't just say, do it in the playoffs until the playoffs actually come. So for now, I say, celebrate James Harden for that. I'm sounding like Doc Rivers talking about Ben Simmons. He said Harden actually put up 38 points. So I think there's something to actually celebrate on this occasion. But James Harden absolutely played his mind out. Tyrese Maxey played his mind out. Joel with 10 assists and 31 points. I mean, I think that was something that even kind of surprised him. You look at him post-game, when they're speaking to him and Harden, letting him know that they're the first Sixers since Wilt and Hal Greer to have 30 and 10 in the same game together. We're talking about unreal stuff, like historic. Like you have to take a breath and enjoy this generation of basketball in Philadelphia, as frustrating as it can be. And it's frustrating at times, especially just some of the no nonsense or nonsensical decisions that are made, things of that nature, and poor play on occasion by certain players. As frustrating as this team can get, at the same time, we're watching two of the greatest to ever play the game in Joel Embiid and James Harden. And on top of that, we're watching a young rising superstar in Tyrese Maxey. And that's just unreal to think about when you think about where the team was during the process and even just before during the Doug Collin years. So, I absolutely love the Bucks game. I think we talked about that probably about as much as we need to for now. But, that was one heck of a game. But they had two more games left on that road trip that were pretty impressive wins as well.
Yeah. So first, everybody knows if you've watched Sixers for a long time, after a big win comes a trap loss. But in this case, against the Indiana Pacers on Monday night, they don't lose the game. They actually win an offensive shootout with the Pacers, 147 to 143. What stood out to me in this game, and you know, I'll get your guys' opinion. What stood out to me in this game is one that, to me, it seemed like they didn't give a lot of effort, right, to me. And although they were missing Tucker and Harris, it doesn't seem like they didn't give a lot of effort on the defensive end. And I look at it and say, hey, these guys, the other team scored 143 points and the Sixers still won. Like, it shows how when their offense is humming, it really hums. And it kind of doesn't matter who's around Embiid and Harden, as long as they can hit an open jumper or a cut to the lane, like, you know, it'll be fine. So that's encouraging going forward for whatever the roster might look like in the future. But Embiid was terrific, as he normally does, kept Miles Turner in foul trouble. Like, Miles Turner, just terrible game, right? And James Harden had 20 assists. And I just feel like both Embiid's 40 and Harden's 20 assists were, like, super effortless. And I'm just like, we are watching, like, we don't really understand what we're watching between these two guys right now. And like you said, we should be taking this into consideration and really enjoying the play, you know, of the Sixers. And then Tyrese Maxey, of course, goes off again. And another thing is Tyrese Halliburton. I mean, that guy's good, man. It's like, there's really nothing you could say bad about him. I mean, on the defensive end, he's a little but offensively, he's the engine that makes the Pacers go. But what has stood out to you, Zach?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, you just talking about Tyrese Halliburton. He really is the engine that makes the Pacers go. But that jump shot, man, I mean, it doesn't look like it should go in. And yet it's one of the most money 3-point shots in the entire league. Like, you know, listen, I'm a defense guy. So that game was a little like, it wasn't in my wheelhouse, I'll say. That being said, like, if you told me before the start of the season that the Sixers were going to win a game in that fashion, I just wouldn't believe you, frankly. Like, to have that type of pace, that type of shot making ability, you know, to rise up to the occasion and match the Pacers shot for shot for shot. And I could go on a million more times because that's how many buckets they made during the game. But it was just absolutely unbelievable on that front. So while I think the Sixers need to kind of reinvest in their defensive end a little bit, at the same time, I think that you should still understand and appreciate what it takes to put forth an offensive effort like this. You know, you can say all you want about the Pacers defense. You can say a lot about the Sixers defense and how they gave up that many points to the Pacers. But, you know, at the end of the day, you know, they went blow for blow. They overcame in the very end. And it just, I mean, a magical night for Jalen McDaniels as well. You know, first 20-point game with the Sixers. Really kind of showed off what he can do long term. The shot wasn't there for him from deep, but you saw the athleticism, you saw the finishing ability. Was that the putback game? That was with the putback jam, right?
That was Milwaukee was the putback jam.
That was Milwaukee.
This was the first of all, he tried to dunk on somebody again, but this was the reverse layup on the fast break and one. Where I was like, oh wow, he actually made that.
Yeah, he's got a little bit of finesse to his game, which is something that, you know, I mean, and I even enjoy the Hornets, but I wasn't even really aware of that in McDaniel's package. So, you know, you got to love what you saw from him. Again, 5 fouls, a little bit of foul trouble. Surprised that Doc is still willing to go to him considering that. And you know, again, with this offensive nonstop game, that was part of it too, is that there were fouls left and right. I mean, there were 3 players with 5 fouls on the Sixers. Like, it was nonstop there. So I'm not overly concerned about McDaniels going forward. I just think it's funny in relation to the Paul Reed discussion when, you know, Paul Reed had 1 foul. But all that just to say that, I think it really was an impressive win all the way around. The bench showed up again. Daniel House actually playing some quality minutes for the Sixers. This is what they need out of Daniel House. I think when you look at the ideal lineups that you're going to have in the postseason, I think you want to be able to have Daniel House ready to go, because there are certain matchups where you're going to need him. I mean, as far as archetype and profile, player profile shapes, like that length, that athleticism, the theoretical 3-and-D ability, and I use the word theoretical very strongly. But when he's on. The way he played with the Jazz last year, that was the player that the Sixers thought they were signing. That's the player that he's been for the most part over the past few games. So I love seeing that from Daniel House. I'd love to see some more. Paul Reed was fantastic in just 11 minutes of work. That's another thing that I love to see. And all in all, I thought it was a pretty solid game. Georges Niang kind of came back down to earth, but that's just kind of what he is depending on the matchup, So it's just going to be about Doc figuring out, all right, well, when do I go more to Niang, and when do I go more so towards – I think you're looking at House and Jalen McDaniels absorbing Niang's minutes in games where he's not really going to play as much. So a lot to learn from it. But then we went right on, back-to-back, Minnesota Timberwolves. I mean, like, to have that back-to-back with Embiid playing both games, like, were either of you guys surprised by that? Because I'll be honest, I kind of thought he was only going to play one.
It's always encouraging when Joel can play back-to-back games, especially on the road as well. That's encouraging. And just taking away from this whole road trip, things you want to see as kind of like litmus test for whether or not your team's a contender or pretender is being able to win games on the road and being able to win games in ways that you don't usually win games. And like you were saying with the Pacers game, that's a big deal. That's a huge deal. The Pacers took the Sixers right out of their pace. Joel Embiid likes to play slow. James Harden likes to play slow. Tobias Harris likes to play slow. But I think Doc Rivers likes to play slow. But being able to get that win, that's a big deal. It's just encouraging to see. It's encouraging to see Joel Embiid playing back-to-backs. I mean, putting up damn near a 40-piece in under 30 minutes. It's always nice to see him kill Rudy Gobert. He does it routinely. I know that like it's kind of like a casual take to rag on a former DPOY that way, because that's not what he does. He's not like a one-on-one stopper, but it's still fun to see.
It is still fun to see, and I mean, it does kind of bring up questions to like, how are we evaluating the Defensive Player of the Year conversation? And like Rudy Gobert, and I think this is also part of where it gets kind of lost. I'm going to bring up real quick. I said I didn't want to talk about the MVP stuff. We're not going to talk about the MVP stuff. I'm just going to bring Jokic into the conversation for a quick second, right? So this is where I get caught in that kind of like messy gray area on the is Jokic a good defender conversation, right? So is Jokic, I'll use the word above average. That's the word that Harrison Wind used, who covers the Denver Nuggets recently when talking to our own Sean Bernard. Is he an above average defender? I would say absolutely not. However, he is not as bad as a lot of other people may have you believe. And part of the reason is that he has great hands defensively. And this is a point that Nuggets fans and media members have made up time and time again, is his ability to, rack up steals. And that is one factor. So that is not enough to make Jokic an above average defender. However, relating that to the Rudy Gobert conversation, that is part of the way that Gobert, like, magnify that by 1,000. And that is how Gobert can impact the game. He impacts it in off-ball scenarios. He impacts it as a rim blocking big in the paint. He's not a one-on-one post defender, especially against Olajuwon 2.0, because, I mean, really, who is, frankly? But that being said, like, Gobert is still a fantastic all-around defender. And to not only take on him, one-on-one, but to be able to kind of overcome, all the double teams and to even get position on Gobert, like, that's the stuff where it's truly impressive what Embiid did. Not even just necessarily the scoring, but the way that he was able to put himself in position against Gobert, I think was even more impressive than just the one-on-one scoring on Gobert. But it's also very fun to see, just because you got a guy nicknamed the Stifle Tower, and your guy goes for 40 in 3 quarters. I mean, how do you not love that, honestly?
Yeah, and I one of the takeaways from the Wolves game for me is they just gave away too much for Rudy Gobert. I don't know if he lost a step or what, but it's just like same old song and dance. Can't guard out on the perimeter. Any stretch big will affect how Utah plays defense. And I mean, excuse me, Utah Timberwolves play defense. Anthony Edwards is really good, but at the end of the day, just watching the Timberwolves, like I know Cat's out, but I'm like they just don't like it. Just doesn't make sense to me. Like that trade happened.
Well, let's not act like it makes sense when Cat's in the lineup either. I mean, like,
exactly. I know. I'm just saying, like, it just doesn't make sense to me, and I'm
sure
to see where the Timberwolves go in the future. But it was good for Embiid to play, not have to play the entire fourth quarter, which was great. And like one of the funniest things I saw was after the game was over, that the Sixers won, and they're like dabbing each other up, and then Embiid says to Paul Reed, "You tired as hell, ain't you?" Because he played the end of the third and the whole fourth. And, you know, it was one of those things where it's like the vibes are good. And I'm happy they were able to, you know, that last road, you know, victory is really tough to get when you got your eyes on your own bed and, you know, your home cooked meal by your chef and all that, you know, that flight where they playing drinking James Harden wine on the way home. Like all that looks really good. And you can overlook the team that you're playing. So I'm glad they were able to get a victory.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the vibes are immaculate, like you said. You know, I do wonder, you know, real quick for you guys, how long before Anthony Edwards demands a trade from the Timberwolves, if we're being honest?
I think Cat leaves first. I think, especially with Gobert there. I think Edwards says very encouraging things. Like he recently talked about how he wants to be known as a defensive player. He's obviously not there yet, but he likes taking on star matchups defensively. He thinks that's the way to play. He said that stuff about All-Star Weekend and like giving it your all. So there's a chance that he kind of has that like that Dame mentality of wanting to be loyal to the city that drafted him. So I'd be encouraged with that. I would hold off on the alarms until we see what a post-Cat Minnesota team might look like. Yeah. I think you can build around Anthony Edwards and Rudy Gobert if you have the right pieces around them.
Well, first, let me say I would be shocked if Karl-Anthony Towns is not traded this offseason. That's the first thing that I would say. I mean, and the only way that would happen is if they just didn't get a return that they deem anywhere near acceptable, and they move him by the trade deadline. So Towns is on his way out of Minnesota, if you ask me. The Gobert thing is interesting because you're kind of locked into that contract at this point. It's one of the worst contracts in the league. Like that's just it. There's no other way to really look at it. You know, really good on Utah for being able to retain Gobert and then move him and gain an immense amount of positive assets, even though he's on one of the league's worst contracts. Just another Danny Ainge steal right there, which is very frustrating as a Sixers fan to see. But, you know, with that being said, yeah, I mean, depending on the return that you get for Cat, you know, if you actually get, because I'm sure Edwards does like playing with at least like Jaden McDaniels, and things have opened up a little bit. We heard Edwards' frustrations playing with both Cat and, though he didn't say that by name, but playing with Cat and Gobert and how everything was clogged up. You know, we heard him talk about that earlier in the season. So I don't know. We'll see. Maybe he does have that Dame mentality. I think this guy's a little bit more of wanting to win than that, and I don't know if they're going to be able to move off Gobert, but we'll see. But let's focus back on the Sixers for a minute. Over these last two games, Joel Embiid, we talked about 42 points against the Pacers, 39 against Minnesota, grand total of 81 points over these past two games. When's the last time that the city of Philadelphia has seen a player this dominant? Now, the answer is obvious, but it does feel like forever ago. You know, it's Allen Iverson, obviously, but it's an unreal feeling, you know, like the electricity that the city had, and it's not the same vibe as Iverson, obviously, but at the same time, it's that level of player. And I'm just going to say it. I mean, Joel Embiid has been an even more impressive player than Allen Iverson in my eyes. Like, you know, is this something that Embiid can sustain going into the rest of the regular season and more importantly the playoffs. And I don't necessarily mean dropping 40-point games left and right, but more so what I mean is this level of dominance. Is this something that you guys think that he can keep going into the playoffs?
Yeah, I think that health is just the main thing with Embiid. Like, you want the dominance to continue, but I'd rather have a healthy Embiid than Embiid having to play 37 minutes and score 45 points, like, for myself. So ultimately, he definitely has it in him, especially with spoon feeding Hart and spoon feeding Embiid for like the easiest 8 to 10 points he'll get in a game. But I just, the health is the most important factor in that question.
For sure. I agree all the way. The only thing that's ever stopped Joel Embiid is his own health and Ben Simmons clogging the paint. So we got one of those issues resolved. There's no reason he shouldn't be able to keep going further. Harden should be good for his longevity and his setting him up with just good looks, taking pressure off of him. That should continue well into the playoffs. There's lineups that the Sixers can run out there where there's really no one you're comfortable throwing a double at Embiid with and leaving somebody open. If you have Niang on the floor, that's 4 shooters that you can't leave alone. So there's really no reason for him to slow down aside from health and potentially Doc Rivers. We don't trust him all the way. I did want to ask the two of you, following this incredible road trip run and seeing some of the kind of finesse moves that Doc's been pulling, bringing Daniel House back, believing in him, reinserting Maxey into the starting lineup, of course. Where's the confidence meter on Doc Rivers? Has he earned any kind of benefit of the doubt, or where are we at there?
My confidence level is the same. Doc has had a fairly good coaching season, in my opinion. In the beginning, his demise was too early, but he has had a fairly good season. He has had some mashup stuff, but he's also made some adjustments quicker than he normally does. I think right now, my level of confidence for Doc is probably as high as it was since last year. I didn't have much confidence, but his first season as head coach, I'm like, oh, all right, Doc is a good coach. Besides the all bench thing, I'm like, yeah, he's been a really good coach. So I think that Doc won't lose them a series, but I don't think Doc will win them a series, if that makes sense. He won't lose them a series, but there are coaches in the Eastern Conference who can outcoach him, Spoelstra, stuff like that. I think if they played in the finals somehow the Clippers there, I think someone like Ty Lue would outcoach Doc. But stuff like that, where I don't think he'll lose them a series, but I don't think he'll win them with his adjustments and coaching.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say I'm kind of in a similar boat as Justin. It may seem unfair, but the kind of spot that I'm in is I absolutely give Doc credit for the adjustments that he's made as of late. Earlier in the pod, I mentioned the kind of fallacy-ridden argument of well, let's see it in the playoffs. Well, unfortunately, that's what I got to break out here for Doc. I have to see this stuff in the playoffs. That's honestly it. He kind of found himself in a position where he has a younger player that he likes in Jalen McDaniels. So he's actually giving him minutes. That's something that I think is change that he deserves credit for, because he recognizes that McDaniels has a skill set that really no other Sixer has. Speaking of his particular skill set and what that brings to Philadelphia. So I do absolutely give him credit for that. I give him credit for the way that he's used Daniel House, like you said earlier, Andy, although, again, part of that is necessity over design. Even still, though, I think that, while he does deserve credit for these moves, you basically have to ride into the playoffs with the same confidence. And maybe that's the mentality of, expect disappointment and you'll never be disappointed. But, that's Philadelphia, baby. And that's where Doc Rivers has me at the moment. So I truly hope he can rise above that. But it's for this moment now, it's just a matter of waiting and seeing.
That's very fair. Doc Rivers earned his benefit of the doubt when he won with the Celtics. But I think
did he earn the benefit of the doubt?
I think since
you might
then,
want to talk to the Celtics players about that one.
Since then, I think he's lost that benefit. There's definitely a lot of issues, but he does, in my opinion, deserve some credit for the things he's done over the last few games, including reinserting Tyrese Maxey back into the starting lineup. He got a lot of flack for that, putting him on the bench. I have to give him a bit of a benefit of the doubt because I do see that for this team to be at its top potential, you need Tyrese Maxey to grow comfortable into that second playmaker. And could he have done that while keeping him in the starting lineup? Yes. He definitely could have with staggering, which he's kind of figured out now. But I do see maybe the benefit of kind of throwing him to the wolves a little bit to see what he can do with it. And I hope that was the mindset.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see what ends up happening. I don't know if Doc has, realized or figured out staggering as much as he's implemented it over the past couple games. And Doc's done this before where, he's taken fantastic ideas and implemented them over a 2-game, a 5-game stretch or so, and then eventually reverting back to Montrezl Harrell in the lineup for some odd reason. So, there is stuff that it is there. He definitely deserves credit for it. He's got to keep it up and continuing to earn that credit. So, you have to give him his props. It's unfair to not, to be frankly honest. But with that being said, I think that there is still reason to be unsure if that is actually going to continue or if that's just kind of a mirage that we're currently seeing. That's the biggest question in my mind for Doc for the postseason. But looking ahead, we're looking next to the Portland Trailblazers game, obviously. Portland coming to town. Now, Andy, as our resident Portland Trailblazers expert, how about you give us a little nice intro here talking about the Portland Trailblazers?
So the Portland Trailblazers are a team in crisis. They're currently down 20 to the Boston Celtics, which everybody should have expected. They're a roster with 1 point guard, 1 center who's been out for a good chunk of the season. He just came back and isn't playing well, but maybe that'll be a little better. I threw up the stat, actually, that somehow Yusuf Nurkic and Joel Embiid have avoided each other their entire careers so far. They've played in 2 or 3 games together. Obviously, the few times it's happened, it has not gone well for Yusuf Nurkic. And I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I can pretty much tell you what's going to happen in the game. Damian Lillard will score 30 to 40 points, and then the Blazers will lose by 20. The Blazers bench has no offense right now because they don't have a point guard. They're running out Cam Reddish at point guard. I love Cam Reddish. He's growing as a playmaker. He will never be a primary ball handler. The Sixers defense is going to pick that apart. They have too much length and too much activity. They're going to generate a ton of turnovers. Chauncey Billups is going to run a zone at some point that is not going to work against Joel Embiid at all. He's going to get maybe 10 offensive rebounds. James Harden will continually collapse that defense, and Dame's going to do everything he can. We're going to tip our hats to him. He's going to make crazy shots. And, yeah, Sixers will walk away with a nice 20-point victory.
Yeah, the Reddish point, I think, is really particularly interesting. It kind of reminds me almost of the Furkan Korkmaz experiment, which I think you can make a compelling argument really actually hurt the development of Korkmaz. So hopefully, and which was fun. It was a great ride at times, and mean, other times not so great, obviously. You kind of hope for Reddish's sake that it doesn't have a similar effect. Reddish, I think, has been phenomenal with the Blazers compared to how he played in the few minutes he was allowed to in New York. But he's definitely going to be one of the players. I'll be down there Friday night. He's going to be one of the players I'm going to keep a close eye on. Dame, obviously. I think it's going to be a fun matchup for Philadelphia fans, and that is unfortunately because I think that your prediction is exactly right. Not only are the Sixers going to win comfortably, in my opinion, but on top of that, Dame will give a little show as well with a high-scoring affair, and I think that's kind of like the perfect situation for Sixers fans. So, interconference game is not necessarily always, especially one against a non-playoff team, is not usually a huge seller. But I would recommend coming to this game for any Sixers fan because you get a chance to see an all-time great in Damian Lillard, not to mention the all-time greats that are in Philadelphia and Joel Embiid and James Harden. But you get to see what looks to be a upcoming solid win. And now that I'm saying all this, they're going to get their asses whooped. Now that I'm saying all this, pardon my French, but they're really just going to get mollywopped now that I'm talking all big. But I feel pretty confident about the Sixers in this game, and I think it's just going to be a fun time. So come on down to the Wells Fargo Center and buy some expensive popcorn and just watch the magic happen.
Can't miss out on the return of the prodigal son, Matisse Thybulle. He's been a beloved addition in Portland. So, yeah, I mean, Dame is must-see TV right now. He's got 27 points while the Blazers are down 25. But, yeah, just quick hits on the Matisse thing. The trade needed to happen for the Sixers, and it needed to happen for Matisse. He's thriving because of the situation in Portland where they're so short on high-ceiling wings, which is why they also brought in Cam Reddish. He's thriving because he's getting these wide-open looks that he did have in Philadelphia, but not to this extent. He's allowed to kind of take the gambles he does on defense, and they're paying off more often than they're not. But when you're playing for a contender like the Sixers, those times where it doesn't pay off and you're burnt for it, they're going to be analyzed under a microscope and dissected. Whereas right now in Portland, any kind of positive defensive play we get is just something that's worth celebrating. So
sure.
We know we all love Matisse, wish the best for him. And Portland got a good one, and I think he's happy in Portland. So it'll be nice to see him again.
I can't imagine a city with an NBA team that matches Matisse Thybulle's personality any better than the city of Portland. Right. And I mean that as the utmost compliment. Like, I could not be happier, as someone who does genuinely want to see Thybulle succeed and be happy and all that great stuff. I can't think of a better spot for him to land than Portland. Obviously, Portland could be a little bit more successful, but we know that Thybulle's had, that working relationship with Damian Lillard in the past. He's clearly had an expanded role with the Blazers. That's been something that's good for him. He still has the occasional off night. Past two games in particular haven't been great for him. Just from a shooting point of view, offensively speaking, of course. But that being said, the opportunity's there for Thybulle. I think that's a situation where, kind of like Jalen McDaniels, this is not a one and done situation for this player and this team. I think that, especially since that he's a restricted free agent for the Blazers, I think that we're looking at a guy who's going to be returning. And I think I want to get this out of the way, right? Because there's always the conversation when a player comes back to Philly. Do we cheer? Do we boo? There's going to be a lot of people who want to boo Matisse Thybulle. And, yeah, he hasn't won a ring here or anything like that. I get all that. If you want to say it's been a disappointment overall, I guess you could even say that. That would even be fair, considering he didn't really progress much as a player with the Sixers. But that being said, this dude was always a professional, one of the kindest individuals to ever put on a Sixers jersey. He was genuinely impressive in what he did. He was one of the most talented defenders that the Sixers have seen in my lifetime. I think there should be nothing but applause for Matisse Thybulle when he comes back. And not only that, but the return that they got for him is paying off pretty well for the Sixers too. This isn't a Barkley situation, where you get scraps back for the player. Like, yeah, I like Jalen McDaniels, and I like having Portland's 2029 second round pick, like stuff like that's pretty good for Philadelphia. So I think that this should not have any malice involved. You can say, when Sixers fans, when they announce the opposing team, obviously there's that chant for each and every player. You're like, Damian Lillard. So, that's always the chant that happens. Like that can happen. That's fine. But as far as like actually him taking the court and stuff, there should be no boos for Matisse Thybulle. There should be cheers or nothing. That's it. Like even if there's nothing, that's fine. But there's no reason to boo the guy. I mean, why are you going to like this is not Ben Simmons. This is, this is not even like freaking Evan Turner. Like this is Matisse Thybulle. Like he did what is to be expected out of a player in his draft range. And then when we moved on from him, we got a solid return. So I can't think of anything to complain about. If you guys feel differently, and I'm not saying you do, speak up your point. But I think that Matisse should be welcomed back with open arms and then given a swift and quick exit when the Sixers win by 20.
Yeah, I agree. And my only question about Matisse against the Sixers is, will Doc strategize to leave him open to help off?
Will Doc strategize? That's an interesting question. That's we will see. I don't mean to interrupt your point, but yeah, no, I do think that is an interesting thing. Expand on that a little bit.
That'll be interesting. Yeah, I just think that Matisse has been left open playing for the Sixers a bunch of times, and he's hit some of the threes. He hasn't hit some, doesn't hit them more than he makes them. So it'll be interesting to see, will he have some juice coming back, or will he still miss those corner threes and stuff when he's left wide open. So it'll definitely be interesting when they like help off Dame and he like passes it to like Nurkic. Like, are they going to help off Matisse on the corner all the time and just let Matisse shoot away? So that'll be interesting to see.
Do you have a expectation for how the game's going to shake out, Justin?
I think it's going to be a close Sixers win. I do think Dame is going to go off. I think Dame's probably going to have like 35, something like that, and he's definitely going to go off. It's going to be one of those nights where like, damn, like what else can we do? Start trapping them and stuff. And that's what I think will happen. But I do think they'll get the dub. But I think it'll be more closer than we think. I think it'll be like a 4-point game with like 2 minutes to go in the fourth type thing. And the Sixers will win. They may win by 7 or 8, but it'll be closer than we think down stretch.
All right. Well, a win's a win, and that's how I feel about, the Baseline Scoop coming back for another episode. That's an absolute win, if you ask me. That's actually all for our show today. So thank you so much for everyone for listening along. Let's go Sixers Friday night against Portland. It's going to be an exciting game. It's going to be a thrilling game, but, from myself and from Justin, from Andy, thank you so much again for listening. And we just hit you with the Baseline Scoop.
Peace.